Sarah, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm excited to talk to you today. It sounds like from what I've gathered online and what I've read in your bio, you have a lot of experience in the cannabis space. Is it over 13 years? Is that right?
Yeah, I always say 13 or 14 because I just don't even remember at this point anymore. I'm like, how bad is that? A long time. A lot
Well,
longer
over
than
if you
most.
say like over a decade, it sounds like so impactful, like, well, I've been in the
Oh, yeah.
industry over a decade. So,
When
yeah.
so many people are getting into it that haven't been in it a long time and they're like, we're experts, we're experts, we're experts. I'm like, it takes a little while to wear that badge, right?
I would imagine so. Yeah, to be a self-proclaimed expert is a whole different breed because
True.
the way I was raised, it's like if you're a badass, then people will say you're a badass. You don't have to say it. Like, they'll talk about you. They'll admire your traits. You don't need to boast those.
Yeah, no,
So,
totally.
yeah. But let me ask you this. So I want to get into your background. I want to ask how it all started, but I also understand that you presented along Tony Robbins in US and Canada. What's that about?
I did. It's kind of embarrassing. So I grew up in like a really like non-traditional household, like no sugar, no fast food, no TV. So a lot of people that know me close, they know I don't know like a lot of pop culture things or like, movies from back in the day. I'm kind of like in my own little bubble. And then I started in cannabis and then I was just like only in cannabis, right? Because it was so busy.
Right.
So I got an email and I was like asking my friend, I'm like, who's Tony Robinson? I'm like, who is this guy? And they're like, wait, what?
Robinson.
Like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like, I don't know. Some guy emailed me or called me and he's from New York and he was talking really fast and they want me to like go on this show. And like my friend
What?
was just like shaking his head. He's like, really? And really, is this what you're saying to me right now? And I was like, well, I don't know if I should even call him back. But anyway, I called them back. It was a cool opportunity. I got a chance to work with he has a gazillion shows.
So,
So it's not
so
like,
was it related in the cannabis industry? Like, so he saw you doing your thing in cannabis and then he reached out? Like, how did that
well,
all
not him. Like
transpire?
he has, like, it's crazy, like learning that business model and how many different shows he has and like the segments, like all the shows are segmented differently. So my show segment was like him as the headliner, Pitbull, who is actually like super, super cool.
Dale.
Um, yeah, no, and then he like speaks and tells how he like becomes famous and then he like sings. It's kind of a fun show. But it was crypto, cannabis, and real estate. So
Okay.
I got to come up and I don't know, I think it was like my first one was like 6, 7 years ago. Yeah, it was probably 6 years ago because it was pre-kids. Um, but I had like such bad imposter syndrome and it was a wild ride. I did like I think 4 or 5 of his shows in San Francisco
Nice.
and Canada. And I became decently close with their show producers. And then that show kind of got the axe when it was COVID, but I think they're starting it up again. I think this year or next year.
Got you. Got you. So, I mean, okay. So you obviously had enough visibility and credibility for Tony Robbins to reach out to you at that time. So, yeah, let's back up and talk about how it all got started. Like what, coming from that kind of, what would you say, kind of not, I don't want to use the word sheltered if you don't think it's sheltered, but
Non-traditional.
non-traditional upbringing, right?
Yeah.
Like what made you even think about cannabis? Like how did it all start?
So my sister had, I'll just give the quick and dirty version, but my sister had a rare blood disorder and they wanted to like cut her open and put her on, morphine and take her spleen. And so my mom knew at that time, we grew up in the Midwest and back then naturopathic doctors were like illegal. You couldn't even use them. So my mom decided to start researching like non-traditional, ways to treat this certain blood disorder that she had. So fast forward 10, 15 years later, my household was natural. It was organic. We used Melaleuca products. We didn't eat meat. And so we did all of the kind of like crazy naturopathic remedies anyway. So at the time I had a advertising agency for spa salons and health facilities. And I helped like dentists, doctors and things like that do marketing. And a pot company contacted me. I used to prospect on Craigslist. and, would help people that couldn't afford like a marketing director or even like a marketing associate to help them with social media. And so I replied to this, Craigslist thing that was like pot company coming to town. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. And I mean, I guess the rest is history from there. So I started at the bottom. I was the office assistant or something like that. I did marketing. I booked tickets. I cleaned the office. Like I did all the things, right? And then worked my way up just because there was not a lot of people that knew what cannabis was or how it worked or what we did in the business. And then, years later, I ended up purchasing the business, building the business, selling the business. And now I'm on my second consulting firm. So it's been a wild ride.
And what was that business? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it was acquired by a publicly traded MSO, right?
Yeah. So dispensary permits and dispensary templates were my first two companies. One was a consulting company for people to acquire licenses and limited license merit-based processes. And then my second business was like just basically born because we'd get booked up. And so we created a bunch of intellectual property and put it on the internet so that when we were booked up, people could just buy that. Because we used to always work exclusively. So we wouldn't be able to represent a custom client in certain areas if we already had a client there. So I sold those to a publicly traded multi-state cannabis company. And then I was the CEO of that company for a bit. And then I ended up stepping down after I had my son because you just don't know what you know. And then you have this baby and you're like, okay, am I going to be traveling every week and, doing all the things. So
right.
It was a good opportunity. And, it was obviously like a huge learning curve for me as somebody that was more of like a solopreneur with like a smaller staff. To then go into like a public company and like really actually trying to figure out, how to expand and what to do. So I would say it was a big learning curve, but I'm kind of a lone ranger. I like to be able to be like, an entrepreneur true and true, where if I come up with a harebrained idea, I don't have to like run it by a gazillion shareholders.
No, I understand that. I mean, I grew up in like individual sports, right? Golf, wrestling, cross country. So like,
Right.
That the onus is on you, right? Did you prepare enough? Were you ready for this match or this, run or whatever it is? So I get that, but also like speed, right? You can kind of move very fast.
Oh my gosh, so fast. Yes.
Yeah. And like, I could even tell like, as you talk, cause like, you're like, yeah, I had that one venture and like, well, you said I worked from the bottom and I like boom, boom, boom. And I got this and then I sold it and now I'm on the next one. So like, I kind of, I'm going to dive in a little deeper and ask you. So like, okay. So you mentioned cannabis permits and then what was the other one?
So it was dispensary permits and dispensary templates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what
and
sparked
I don't even
those?
know.
Like, what has sparked the interest there? Like, as you were up and coming, like, did you see a gap? You see a opportunity?
We were the first consulting company in the cannabis industry. So like, basically my ex-business partner that I ended up buying the company from, like he was wicked smart. I learned so much from him and he, saw the opportunity coming from Oakland. And then the guys taught me everything I know. And I just happened to be like super good at sales because I was very passionate about our project. And so after, I kind of supported the business through marketing and, being like the office assistant or whatever, they're like, oh, just try sales. So I tried sales and, I started to kill it. My first opportunity of sales was in Illinois, and Illinois was like really when, for me, the industry like became something where hedge funds were looking at it and our clients looked a lot different in the sense that we used to be like, come to the dark side. And then these guys, they were just, big business guys. And I had to present to them differently. I had to dress differently. And it was a huge, huge, huge learning curve for me. But it was awesome. Like, I learned so much and I did the smart thing, which was I picked like really super smart clients because I know that they could learn from me and I could learn from them. So,
and they'll probably help you grow, right? Because if they're good, then that they're going to prosper within the industry and they'll probably refer you to other business down the road. So.
Oh yeah. Like I think that was like my superpower where I was like, okay, this person's super well connected. They seem like very smart, way smarter than I am at this stage. So it's like, okay, like teach me. And I wasn't afraid to ask them questions,
That's half the battle. And wouldn't you agree that like most entrepreneurs or even solopreneurs, right? Especially if you're on your own, like to have that confidence to ask the dumb questions and be okay with it because you just don't know, but you know that having that information will be so invaluable to like propel you in the future. That's kind of like where you just have to do it, right? You got to, it's like a Band-Aid, just rip it off.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was such a mutually beneficial relationship that I never felt like this like young girl that didn't know anything because they didn't know what I knew. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it
right.
always felt like really like a nice relationship where it was give and take, and it was like, hey, what do you think about this, or how do you structure that, or can we get on the phone with like your attorney or your CPA and work through these problems together, because I knew the cannabis layers and they knew like the ultimate business layers. So I would say Illinois was my favorite market for that, where it was like I got in, you know, I had an apartment there for a while. I worked in Illinois. I used to take like 40 meetings a week. I was just like bam, 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 in the sense that it was like back then you had to like really sift through who was going to do it, who had the capabilities to do it, who was drug free, who was felony free, who was all the things that you needed to build like this perfect picture.
That's the hardest part, right? I mean, isn't that the hardest part? Because that can take months, if not years, in some industries where you're vetting partners and you're, you know, checking them out, making sure that they're legit. So did you expedite that, or like, was it
I was broke. Feeling? I was so broke that I was like, I don't have time to mess with you. No, I do not want to date. No, I do not want to go to dinner. Like I have this. And if you want it, tell me at the end of this 60-minute meeting. And if you don't want it, don't ever talk to me again. And that's like, I was cutthroat. And so people are always like, are you from the East Coast? And I'm like, no, I'm from the Midwest, which usually it's like sweet, soft spoken, but I was broke and I really wanted to be successful.
Right? Midwest people can read people, I would say also.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess you're not used to like all the like BS. But then, you know, after that, we started working on the East Coast. And I mean, closing deals on the East Coast, like the easiest thing. Somebody's going to tell you they think you're stupid or you're smart, or they're going to do it or they're not going to do it in the first 2 minutes. So it's like, it's not this long courting process. It's like, hey, we like you and we want to hire you. And then it's like, okay, cool, let's do this.
Right. They're to the point in the Northeast. No doubt about it. There's no bullshitting going on. And you get the feeling right away, which, I mean, I went to school in the Northeast and I totally learned and appreciated that trait, right? Because it kind of, like you said, it gets right to the point and cuts all the BS.
Totally. You know? I always say I was like raised in business on the East Coast, because it was like, I mean, I ended up partnering with this group at one point during my career on the East Coast, and they were like way older. They were like, you know, in their 60s at the time. I was like early 30s. And I would present them with these decks and they'd like laugh at me and be like, go sharpen your numbers and come back to me. But it was awesome because it was like, it was cutthroat, where it was like, I felt like I had one other opportunity to do it right. And if I didn't do it right the second time, like I wouldn't get that opportunity again. But I think that's where my like quick moving, fast thinking, you only get, you know, your first opportunity to make the impression like came into place. And, you know, with my staff and business partner and everything like that, that's what I definitely like drill into everybody's head.
Yeah. And in this day and age, like, I mean, time that we live in, like, it's hard to come across that way because people are so triggered or they're very defensive, and like how, you know, some people can't handle that like direct criticism, right? But I think that in most cases, especially in business, it's a good thing because, like you said, it cuts the bullshit and it gets you right to, okay, what do I need to do to improve my role so that I can deliver to you what you need, right?
Yeah.
And in most situations in corporate America, it's like they kind of dance around it, or there's a lot of bureaucracy where it's like you go crazy just trying to figure out what you need to deliver. When if you're just told, right, it's like so much easier and better.
Yeah. My PR lady always said, Kim Prince from Proven Media, she always said that I just had like this intuitive way of doing business. And like, I wasn't really bred for this. I mean, my dad's an entrepreneur or whatever, but I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day and I think I've started like a couple dozen, if not 3 dozen businesses for people. So it's like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I just kind of always knew what was next. And so I think it was like somewhat of like a gift from somewhere, because, you know, I didn't like, even though I had my MBA, it's like, you don't learn any of that. It's just like on the fly, fast thinking, and like,
failure.
I think sometimes,
right?
yeah, I failed a lot of times, you know.
I mean, hey, no, I mean, it's natural,
No,
right? I mean,
totally. No, and it's great.
yeah,
It's amazing. I mean, your best lessons are your failures.
totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of like the next thing, so let's move on to the cannabis business advisors, right? So you mentioned you sold your first company. So what sparked the interest to become the founder and CEO of Cannabis Business Advisors, and what are y'all all about? What's the value you add?
Yeah, so in 2018, when I sold dispensary permits, and I became the CEO of that company, and then I had my son in 2019. So I had like a bit of time to like really do some soul searching and figure out like what the next phase of Sara looked like, especially after becoming a mother. And I have licenses too. So in my process of getting clients licenses, I was able to score a handful of licenses myself. So I'm actually a licensee across the United States and a couple different states as well. I think I have like 8 or 9 licenses. And my business model for those is to rent them out. So they don't like keep me busy on a day to day. And, I had a really deep book of business in the sense that I'd worked in 5 countries, 25 states at that time. So people are constantly coming back to me and saying, hey, can you help us? Hey, can you help us? So to be honest, it would be super silly of me not to have a firm. My business partner now is Maxime Cott, and she's our director of licensing. And I always say that she is much better at licensing than I ever was because her attention to detail is like wicked. And as you can tell, I'm more fast and furious. But she had worked for me, I think at that time, like 5 years. And she was, kind of looking towards like what's next for her as well, because I had taken her with me in the public company. And I think that she like missed the support and the guidance and the mentorship that I was able to like give her when I was there. And so when my non-compete was up, I was like, hey, like, let's do this. So she's now my business partner, and she owns part of the Cannabis Business Advisors. And it just, it made sense. And I still love the industry. It was something that I like literally had to sit with myself to be like, okay, do I want to do this as a mother? Do I want to do this as somebody that's like made a little bit of money? Do I want to get back into the rat race of it? And I think I've done like a really, really good job being a mom of 2 kids. And creating a team, an environment around me where it's not the rat race that it was in my first business. Like I understand how to prioritize differently. I understand how to put boundaries up differently. Like
Delegate.
Yes. Saying no is like this thing that comes so naturally when you're a mom, because you're like, okay, like that's going to take away from my kids.
Right.
So I think being a mom has like definitely made me a better business person. In the
awesome.
sense that, yeah, like, cause I know how to say no. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be like, or I know boundaries. Like some of my clients laugh at me now because they're like, what are you doing right now? Cause they can tell I'm outside and I'm like, I'm hiking. And they're like, oh, must be nice. Especially people like in the East Coast and stuff like that. And I'm like, I am at the point in my career where if you don't want somebody that's hiking during your conference calls, like I'm not your girl. You know what I mean? Like
and I'm on the call. I'm on the call.
Yeah,
so what does it
and
matter?
I'm telling you what to do,
Right.
So I don't know. We take such a small load of clients at this point that like for me, when we're interviewing clients, it's definitely a personality test where I'm like, okay, is this person going to like give me heartburn at the end of the day? And if they are, I'm like, nah.
Right.
So, I think that comes with success too, where you're like, okay, I'm comfortable, I'm fed, I'm not like trying to take every deal because like I need to pay my rent. And so I think that, selling my business was like a hard thing because it was my first baby. But I think being pregnant was easier knowing that I had, a son on the way, and it was just kind of like, okay, like let go of this and see kind of what else you can create. So I've been lucky in the sense that I've been able to create some cool things, and I'm going to continue creating cool things in the industry.
Yeah, no, that's amazing how it's been like you mentioned, like a multifaceted kind of, experiences that have just kind of brought you to where you understand you're a better business person for it, right? Like you said, being a mom, selling your business, right? Learning from those kind of challenges, opportunities, failures, perhaps. And that was kind of a segue to like my next question, and you may have already answered it because it sounds like you've established a really good way of setting those boundaries and making time for yourself and not overcommitting. But like being a business owner, a mom, a license holder across every state, like you said, executive in this cannabis space, like how are you juggling it all? And for the other, women and mothers out there, like what would you tell them that they could kind of hone in on that'll help them navigate through this crazy industry and life you know?
Yeah. I think for me, like I built my career first and then I had kids much later in life. So, I was mid 30s when I had my first kid. And so I had all that time to focus 60, 80 hours a week on work. And so since there was like a huge event of selling my companies, and then after that, I actually ended up selling some licenses too, where I had a different luxury than a lot of people that didn't build a business and sell it, to take a step back to say, okay, I'm comfortable and I've had a lot of fun over the last couple of years. What will make me happy? And that answer was cannabis, but it was cannabis in the way that I didn't have to work 60, 80 hours. It was that I had a team to support me, that my director of licensing is amazing. And then I had like all of these things like going for me and orchestrated in a way that we can say no. I do like, we do client work, but like we're not a big firm that has like, $100,000 a month overhead. We keep our small team like really tight. We use independent contractors when it's necessary. And I guess I just got really good at saying no. And then like my job in the, company is to find opportunities to like, leverage ourselves. So a lot of our clients are newbies to the industry. And so maybe they need licenses to appear on their applications or industry experience to appear on their applications. So we take a lot of equity in our projects, in the sense that I don't really like to do projects that I don't have equity in. And so, you're just, your parameters change, your parameters change. But, I think that being in the industry as long as I was, and having the notoriety and having the successes under my belt that I did because I got in early, not because I was so smart, because it was literally just because I got in early where I was able to like, kind of figure the industry out as it like was built. It gave me that luxury of having media value and having, like you Google me, like if you want me on your team and you like my personality and kind of the projects I've created, then we're a fit. If you don't like it, there's a gazillion other people out there for you. And I've always kind of had that mentality where I'm like, if you love me, great. If you hate me, that's okay too. Like, no worries.
Right. Nothing personal. It's business. Yeah.
No.
And that's an important point that you just raised, and that is, I mean, I'll use the word like a digital footprint that you've created, right, over the years, where when anyone questioned early on, like they just Google you and that your credibility is there, right? You're published, you're out there, you're posting, whether it's on social media or you've been featured. And I think that's a lesson for most up and comers in this industry, because I don't think it's too late, right? I mean, the legal cannabis industry is still growing and burgeoning. I mean, there's 22 states that are adult use at this point. So we're almost halfway there. But I think the more of that, like you said, if you're adding value, to just kind of document that, it's always good so that people can look back and see really who you are and what you've said in the past, right?
Yeah. And, my background was marketing. So I've always placed a lot of value on keeping the website up to date, being the number one source for what's happening in the United States, for each market, because it's different. I have a personal website that I always update. We spend money on photography. We just did a photo shoot the other day. And it's not because I like seeing myself. It's because it's a necessary piece of business, especially in a digital age. But there were 2 years where we never even met clients because people were freaked out because of COVID. So, all of that like work and like my background in marketing was like very solid for that point. And like, if people are like, can you, rattle off your references or give us clients to call, like it got to the point where it's like, like, just do a quick Google search. And if you still want references, clients, but I've always been really big on like creating systems and portions of your business that are all automated. So we use like for the website, automatic emails that like trigger at certain points. And like we've always done, I have standard operating procedures for my teeny business. Every single project looks the same. And I'm really big on systems, and I'm big on like mailbox money as part of your business. I traveled to 26 or 24 or something like that countries, starting in probably 24 or 2015. And I'd wake up in Croatia and have money in my mailbox or my inbox email from my automated, digital downloads. So, I think freedom's been my like number one motivator in every single capacity of my life. And that's financial freedom. And that's like just the freedom to, take your computer and go travel somewhere and be able to like work from anywhere, or go on a hike and still like have a conference call and problem solve. And so I think that's like a big part of my personality, where I never wanted to feel like suffocated in a corporate environment where I had people telling me what to do. And because that was like the thing that made me tick, it was always my goal, to be able to create things that allowed me to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to your point earlier about being passionate about being a solopreneur, right? I mean, your destiny's in your own hands, and that's a beautiful thing if you're driven and passionate and hardworking, which you're checking the box on all those things. And so you're kind of paving your own pathway.
And it's funny because I always said I'm like dyslexic and I should have never been writing requests for proposals or requests for applications. And so I've always said I am definitely not the smartest, but I probably ran the fastest and I probably worked the hardest. And so it ultimately like got me over the hump. And so, I mean, I think that like, my message to everybody is always like, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And that's like literally where people think like I had funding and family money and like, like a rich boyfriend or whatever that was. And it's like, no. I just had a lot of grit, and I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into what I did because I loved it. And like, that's what made me successful.
Right. And life is about balance, right? And it's someone who's trying to be excellent or extraordinary. It's balancing being a good mother, being a good business owner, being in shape, right? Like making the right decisions, like being consciously aware of what you're consuming. Like all that is a balancing act. And there's times and days and months where one drops and the other one goes higher. And it's all this balancing act. But if you can keep it all stable and keep it at a level where you're thriving, then that's a beautiful thing. And so it sounds like, you really value that balance, right? Because you don't want to be constrained to like an office desk or a cubicle or like whatever it is, right? You want to kind of dictate your own future, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, like even my own reality, like where it's like, oh, people are like, you can't do this, you're not this, or you can't do that because you don't have this. And it's like, why? Like, watch me, you know what I mean? And I think that I always say this story or whatever, but like this guy was like, you're never going to be able to sell your business. Your business is you. And I remember when he said that, I remember where I was sitting, I can see everything that was happening around me. If I like think back, and this is like over 10 years ago. And I was like, this guy better watch me. And then the day that I sold my business, I was like, here's the press release. And it wasn't a small valuation either. So, it's like, it's good to have those people that, he's like the number one person I always want to thank. Cause I'm like, gosh, like if he would have never said that to me, like, maybe I wouldn't have systemized my business. Maybe I wouldn't have done all the things like creating the IP stream and, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Who knows? Right. Who knows where I'd be?
Well, it takes just one person to say you can't, right? And if you have that personality type and that outlook, like, just watch me, bitch. I'm going for it,
Oh, I had a lot of naysayers, trust me. Like I won't go into stories, but one day I'll probably write a book, and I would say that the men that couldn't keep up with me really like to have like, their little zinger comments here and there, and I'd be like, whatever. Whatever.
Keep adding to that book, because obviously, right, we're still in like the first or second inning, like the work's not done. And I want to talk to you about the cannabis licensing application process, right? I mean, that is a bear, and it varies from state to state, right? And so what are you seeing from your perspective with the current license holders throughout all stages of growth, and how each state has its own sets of challenges and even opportunities?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really interesting because we used to do like a quarterly meeting where we'd take down everything that was happening in the United States. And like, I'd look at like what, our next states were and what strategies going on. And we do like a weekly state update where we brief on, what movements happened. and what movement's projected to happen. But we started to do that meeting like every 3-4 weeks now, just because there's so much going on. There's states that are, switching from med to rec. There's states that are switching from dry to med. There's states that have rec programs, social equity programs. So like right now, licensing is wild, and it's, between checklist processes where you just hand it in and you get a license, or lottery where it's dumb luck, or, these huge monster merit-based licenses like we just wrapped up in Texas and in Florida. And, the game's just changed so much, where like we just did a really big project in Illinois for some social equity candidates. And, the systems that was having to put in play for that versus a merit-based process is like, we're still learning. Things are still changing. And so, I think that's what like keeps me always interested in the industry, is because like you think you've got one model figured out, and then every single state changes. They build on each other for sure. And like you can look at a state and be like, oh, they stole that from Pennsylvania, or oh, that's the old Maryland program, because I've been in it long enough that I've seen all of them. But it's always interesting in the sense that everything's evolving. And there's not one model that would ever work for all states. So,
is there one model that's like particularly good in your opinion? That's like, oh, they're doing it pretty good over there? Or
so social equity is really hard for me. I actually just won a social equity license in New York, last week. And so that's like super exciting. And New York's doing it okay in the sense that they match the social equity licenses with the fund. But I just got some of the specifics on the fund, and it's like 12%. The build out's $450 a square foot. And like I build out facilities all the time, and like 200's great. It's a great store. So they're putting it together in a way that's like almost signing the social equity candidate up for like debt for a very long time. So I'm probably obviously not going to go that route with my projects, where I'll be able to pull in different type of financing.
Right.
But all the states are so different, and all the states are so the state. Do you know what I mean? Like the state has to have different ingredients for it to tick. And there's different things that they need to do in the legislation to like ensure it passes. And so I think in my like younger career, I was like the first person to be like, well, they shouldn't have done that. And now in my like, I've dealt with a lot of politicking and, just really understanding like what goes into like making things happen, from a political stance. And at the end of the day, you're going to piss 50% of the people off, right? So sometimes these lawmakers, or like the people that are drafting the legislation, have to do things to get it passed. So there's not perfect programs, but the programs tend to be perfect for the environment in the sense that they're hyper localized, and so that they pass, and so that they're for the people, right? So I don't know. I'm not like one of those like negative people. I'm more just like, okay, progression's good. I don't love lotteries because I think it's just dumb, but I prefer like a merit-based credential, application, and then, but just because it's like scored and it's like may the best person win kind of a thing. But hey, listen, we have to do it all now. I don't get to say I only want to work on merit projects. There's not enough just merit projects.
Right. And you said at the beginning that you have licenses across the country. So, and you said you rent them out. Like, talk to me about that. What does that mean?
Yeah. So like a lot of times if somebody wants a discount, we'll take equity, or if somebody doesn't have industry experience, we'll take like a smaller stake of equity. And so like in those situations, the local partner will always run the business. And then you're like their Xanax at the end of the day, where they're like freaking out and they like call you, right? You're just there to like calm them down. And then in some of my, facilities, it's like, I didn't necessarily want to operate it, so I've sold them. And then in some of my facilities, there's somebody that's a very good operator that wants to come in and, operate the facility. And so at that point, they're managing everything. I mean, you're keeping your eyes on it, but it's not like day to day where I'm having to like sit an employee down for like, wearing cat hair on their uniform or whatever.
Right.
Which I prefer not to do. You're dirty again today. That's the realistic of, retail cannabis is not glamorous. Everybody thinks like my life's so glamorous. I'm like, if you have seen some of the like taxis I've been in and how I've had to like schlep myself from meeting to meeting in snowstorms and the conversations that you have to have with like retail staff. Like, this is not glamorous, guys. It's just really not.
It's the grind time. That's what the misconception is, right? They think like you're in cannabis, it's so glorified and you're rolling in the dough, but it's like, no, this is the grit, like you mentioned earlier, and the grind, because like it's all happening now. Nothing's settled, right? Everything's up in the air.
Retail is not sexy, and neither is agriculture, and neither is manufacturing. So like, is growing mushrooms, or not mushrooms, like tomatoes sexy? Like, no, it's not. It's agriculture, right? So I think people just, I don't know, people like, I used to not even tell people what I do if I was tired at a business dinner. I'd just be like, or at like a casual dinner, I'd be like, oh, I sell paper. And they'd be like, you work for Xerox? And I'm like, yeah. Because I just so don't need to have the conversation of, oh, you're in the cannabis industry. And it's obviously less and less now, but like, it's not what people think it is. It's a business, and it's hard work, and it's, you know, all the things that we know that it is.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Well, and it's like there's new emerging markets, right? So with licenses, I've heard that there's been actually a few states in the recent 2 years that have come online. I don't know how many exactly, but what are you seeing with these new markets, and what can operators expect in the licensing process?
I mean, honestly, it's so like right now we're focused on like 13 markets, where before we'd be focused on 1 or 2 at a time. So, I mean, I can tell you like Minnesota's, there's some movement going on. Pennsylvania, there should be some movement going on. Maryland's, you know, movement is going on. Delaware, there's movement going on. And when I say movement, I mean like processes either switching from med to rec, but licenses that will be available.
Right.
And
it's
so like,
get your ducks in a row, right? Like get prepared.
Totally. And that's different for every state. So if you want to be like a social equity person versus like a regular license holder, like the marching items are different. So not to like plug the website, but like literally go to the website, see what's happening on the state, reach out to us. And then there's like a specific formula that we would tell you to put together for each state. And it's the big. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of information online, where if you're just kind of like a looky-loo and want to check it out, like sign up for our drip email campaigns, and they'll give you like a ton of information. Or if you want to talk to one of us, like, you know, do that too. But there is like, I was like recently kind of mentally trying to take it all in, because I'm like, we've never had a moment in cannabis where there's so much going on. Like I have boards up in my office, or like big, huge sticky notes that basically like give me like my quick mental breakdown of all the states that are going on. Because when you have that many going on, you get confused. Is the holding period 4 years? Is the barrier to entry 2,500 or 200,000? So I have like cut sheets on my walls, just because there's just so much going on in cannabis right now.
Right.
In licensing.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, there's so much going on. I mean, safe banking was up for discussion again within the federal government. We also heard about price compression throughout the industry, licensing, new states coming online. I mean, every day is just new stuff. So,
well, and that's the thing. Like, I don't keep in like what's the price per pound going in Ohio? Like, I have no idea. I could get you that number really quick, but like, even though we open facilities and assist with operations, like we're not knee deep in operations. We're knee deep in the more positive side of the business, in the sense that I know that the cannabis industry is like experiencing a major correction right now, obviously, as it needed to. But our side of the business is still like new blood coming in, getting licenses, deals happening, licenses trading. And so we're not really in like the doom and gloom piece of cannabis at this stage in our career.
Right. Yeah. Cause I mean, you're working with the entrants, right? You're working at the first stage of, of them entering the industry, which is licensing and registering their business. I mean, all the basic stuff to start a business.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. What haven't we covered that you want to touch on before we wrap up, Sarah? The floor is yours.
I feel like I was like
not
kind
to put
of
you
all
on the
over
spot, but to put you on the spot.
You can tell I'm fine with that by now. No, I feel like we did cover a lot of ground. I feel like, it was like more of a casual conversation, in the sense that, it wasn't as structured as some of my media interviews, but like I've done that before where it was like I went from point A to point B. But I mean, things I'm most excited about in cannabis, and I think that your audience should be excited about as well, is like, you know, all these upcoming opportunities. And that's not just in licensing. So when I was on the Tony show, it's like, what are you good at? Are you good at marketing? Is your background in security? Do you understand things about IT that other people don't? Because like for me, I've always invited people to the industry where it's like, don't just look at the plant touching, look at ancillary, because guess what? We need talent in this industry. There's not enough of it.
Right. Talent and
me,
professionals. I bet there's so many healthcare professionals that are like licking their chops on the sidelines going like, please let this be like publicly accepted and relevant in healthcare, because I myself am using it like outside of work, right?
I just got a
like,
text today where it was like, I'm going to get drug tested at work. Like, am I in trouble? And I'm like, the fact that we're even having this conversation anymore, where we're in a rec state and you could go into a dispensary if you're over 21 and purchase cannabis to help you sleep. Like, that's okay. You know, the fact that we still have to have those conversations is like crazy making to me.
It's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. I was in Tennessee. I was in Nashville like 2 weekends ago or whatever. And what is interesting too is there's like this whole other opportunity that's not in cannabis, that's in hemp, with the Delta 8 and the Delta 9. And like I was walking downtown on Broadway and there's like, you know, cannabis shops or THC shops. So, I mean, honestly, the you know, the options to get involved in the industry are literally endless, like endless.
Yeah. I'm in Texas and they're like openly marketing Delta 9 now. And I'm like,
everywhere.
How are you doing that? Like, what?
It's legal.
It's legal from the hemp, right? Like from the hemp side of it. But like, it's just amazing that, because I mean, Delta 9 is Delta 9, right? Like, but I understand legally they're okay to do it because it's derived from the hemp plant, not a cannabis plant. It's very wild. It's the Wild West right now, Sarah. It's crazy.
It is. And people are not paying attention to that as much as they should, because that's like a very big interrupter in the industry that I don't think people saw coming. So it'll be interesting to see how this all goes.
And it's happening because of the lack of federal enforcement and regulation. And states, right? Like Texas is not legal, right? So it's on Texas also. They're not regulating this shit. So, and when they try to ban,
and that was the problem, where they're like, we don't want to look at it, and then it's like, just kidding, here it is. Like, like, you didn't want to look at it, but you should have looked at it, because there's a lot of states that don't allow it.
Right. You've created this problem, this bigger problem now, where you could have just said, hey, let's regulate CBD and Delta 8 and we'll stop it there. Now there's freaking HHC and THCD and HCC. And I mean, I can't even tell you all the different chemical compounds, which I'm not hating on, but it is the wild, wild west. So.
Yeah. It's just, the only thing is like one of my best girlfriends works in the poison center in Minnesota. And some of these drugs are very dangerous. Yeah. And so, you know, it's landing children in ER, and some of them, you know, not out of ER, if that makes sense. And so like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like a definition problem that needs to be corrected. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't exist. It just needs to exist in the way that we exist, which is in a regulatory compliant environment. So.
Yep. I could not agree more. This has been a very fun conversation, Sarah. I really appreciate your time. You mentioned your website, but what is the website? Where can people find y'all, get in touch if they want to learn more?
Yeah. So for like the business and the RFPs and the RFAs that we do, our request for proposal, request for application, it's just thecannabisbusinessadvisors.com. Very, very generic, but very Googleable. And then if you want to get in touch with me, just Google my name, and I have a personal website, and you can contact me on my contact form.
There you go. Making yourself accessible to the public. I love it. Yeah. Really appreciate your time, your expertise, and sharing your experience in the industry. It's been fun. Let's do it again real soon.
Let's do it. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Bye.